Okay, so this is my re-recording of the lecture from today because somebody, me, made a mistake and did not hit the record button. And for that, I really am sorry. I thank you for your patience. And sooner or later, I will figure this whole thing out and have my routine figured out. Let me go ahead and share these PowerPoints with you so that we can do this. This is not a problem. And we're going to, oh, it is recording. Let me do a share. All right. So management 4950 week 2. Hit the right button, Brian. Learner safety. So after inclusion safety, which is the first stage, Clark, he discusses learner safety. We are going to be considering the human needs of those that we lead. Remember, a leader is human and the people they lead are human. And so there's a lot of common needs between leaders and team members, employees, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We have very similar emotional needs, physical needs, etc. Here we must consider the human needs of those we lead. This ties back into last week when we looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how an organization can actually deal with helping to meet those. Clark 2020 pointed out that people have an innate need to learn and to grow. And this must be provided in an environment that is free from fear and rejection. Think about fear and rejection. Have you experienced it at work before? Has a leader caused you to feel fearful or to feel like you're being rejected? It's not a pretty picture. It doesn't feel good, does it? It can actually feel really bad. So let's try to avoid that as leaders. That's why we're going to apply psychological safety in how we lead our team. Failure. Clark pointed out that not having someone who cares whether we fail or succeed is the definition of devastation. Once again, think back to teams you've been a part of. Did people care if you succeeded or failed? I hope that there was someone there that cared that way, because without that, we often feel lost. Clark also noted that we fail first to those that we work with. So the people we work closest with will see our failures maybe sometimes before we do. Success is virtually impossible when we are suffering at an emotional level. If you're emotionally distraught, destroyed, torn apart, broken, success, it's not going to be happening. You've got to get to a place where you're free from that fear and the rejection that destroys you emotionally if you want to succeed. And sometimes, most of the time, it requires leadership that is willing to provide an environment that is free of that fear and that rejection. Remember, rejection, humiliation, or punishment, these can often be forms of abuse, according to Clark, and I totally agree. He says that the unsafe workspace is most likely a refuge of ridicule. When I was a sergeant in the Army, we had two teams. Mine, I tried to run without ridicule. The other team ran with an authoritarian governance style and ridicule around the clock. It was devastating, not just to the people on that team, but people around that team. It tore into the very essence of their being. It destroyed the morale. Attrition. An environment of fear and ridicule, in that environment, the most qualified employees often leave first. And all that's left are poor performing employees, and they stay because they know that they can't easily find another employment opportunity because their track record is not good. So if you want to obtain and retain quality workers, team members, make sure that fear and ridicule is not a part of your leadership style. And Clark also wrote, where learner safety exists, the leader creates a learning A learner process with low social friction and low emotional expense. In other words, the ridicule is that social friction. Being ridiculed on a team makes it so you don't want to contribute. You don't want to learn more. You don't want to give more. You don't want to input more. And then that low emotional expense, you don't want people having so much emotion, negative emotion, because of things that happen on the team, that it precludes them from actually doing the function they were hired to do. So if you want your team to run smoothly, reduce that social friction, no ridicule, and reduce that emotional expense, remove fear. And now people don't have a reason to be scared emotionally, to be apprehensive socially. Okay, so the first step in creating learner safety. Clark 2020 pointed out that the leader should make the very first steps in creating an environment where learning is safe. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes a leader is not the manager. It could be a fellow team member, and he or she actually is the one that binds the group together and focuses that group on a common goal and purpose. That really is what a leader is. Leadership is a lifestyle, it's a way of living, versus being a manager is a position, it's a title. Now, managers should all be leaders, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. So, a close relative to learner safety is an inclusive work environment. If you want your team to feel that it's safe at work to learn or safe on that team to learn, make sure that the work environment is inclusive. Don't push people out. Don't create an in group and an out group. Don't create this dichotomy of derision within that team. Bring the team together as a whole, inclusively, regardless of gender, race, age, anything like that. Leave that stuff out. If people are there and they're qualified to do the job, just be inclusive. Remember last week, being human, that's the one criteria. So this stage requires that the leader is active in the process. Once again, the leader may or may not be the manager. Mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. Case in point, I am recording this after class ended because, like a complete moron, I forgot to hit the record button on Zoom. I want to make sure you've got the material available for you. So in case that you missed this last session, this lecture, you are able to now watch it because I want to make sure the same thing happened last week. I am so sorry. Hopefully I'm getting better. I think I'm getting better. I do apologize. I want to make sure you have it. So I made a mistake. One, I did not hide the fact I made the mistake. Two, it happened. I can't deny it. I'm living up to it, but I'm still fulfilling what I need to do for my team, you guys. Leaders must disconnect fear from mistakes and failures. Now, once again, if you're a heart surgeon or a brain surgeon, a slip up or mistake could cost someone their life. We're not talking about that. We're talking about mistakes in the learning process here. If you have a team and you're taking them through the learning stages and the process of learning something for that team, for that job, for that project, people are going to make mistakes. No fear, no ridicule. Accept the mistakes. That doesn't mean you encourage mistakes, but rather you accept the fact that they happen and you accept when they happen. And when they happen, you use as an opportunity to further teach somebody. Because failure is a great teacher, according to Clark, and I totally agree. Now, respect and permission. At every stage during psychological safety, you're going to see that there is respect and there is permission. In this stage, permission is directed toward the individual's ability to fully engage in the learning process. And respect is directed toward the individual's ability to grow and learn. So let's talk about an example. Clark noted that many college professors are more authoritarian in how they lead their courses. But is this really conducive to the learning process when we're considering learner safety? Not at all, no. Mistakes are going to happen, and they can each be moments of learning and growth if used properly. You should never feel humiliated when you are corrected in one of my classes. I want each of you to experience learner safety. But while I'll never try to humiliate a student, if your work is substandard, then please don't be surprised if I give you a low grade. I mean, facts are facts, but I can do that without doing something that creates humiliation, fear, ridicule. Those should never exist in a classroom. Learning and emotion. Emotion is nested inside of reason, and reason is nested inside of emotion. Now, that may sound like a circular argument, which is a logical fallacy, but it's not so. It's not a circular argument because these are both parts in our mind, and they're directly tied to each other. They're intimately interwoven in a way that at sometimes reason is encompassing emotion. Other times emotion encompasses reason. And this is because if we allow for our emotions to run amok, we can use our logic to come over and to squash them down a bit, to temper them. And if our logic is getting to the point that we sound like a robot, our emotions can come back up and humanize us and squash some of that logic. So it's really situation dependent, which one is really encompassing which one at that moment. According to Clark, humans process socially and emotionally and intellectually simultaneously. We like to think that, okay, I had this happen, I felt the emotions, now I'm going to deal with logic, or I felt the event, I looked at it logically, when I get home, I'll let my emotions come out. We like to think we can do that. Unfortunately, we can't, because we experience all three simultaneously: the social aspect, the emotional aspect, and the intellectual aspect. Modern technology impacts how we learn. The internet has become a repository of information. And much of this information has not yet been vetted. This creates an environment that, let's say, misinformation and disinformation can run amok. So our emotional response can increase. We can become emotional about a subject if we don't check it with the logic. The logic is going to turn around and vet the information. Once we vet the information, now we know whether we should be feeling the emotion or not. So use your logic to check the information before your emotion gets out of control. Logic seeks out the verification of information and guards against that misinformation, disinformation. Verification. Leaders must remember that every employee nowadays has got at least one smartphone, and they can verify any claims instantaneously. So if you're a leader and you're making claims, just know somebody's sitting there with their smartphone verifying. You don't want to be a leader who lies to the team, because in time, truth will surface and your credibility will be destroyed. Now, it might seem like it's a bad thing that people can verify instantly. I say no, it's a very positive thing. There's nothing bad with that, nothing wrong with that. It creates an atmosphere of accountability that my claims are verifiable. The social aspect of learner safety. Clark wrote that the social exchange of encouragement for engagement defines learner safety. You have to encourage people for engaging in that team. How can you encourage others to learn? Let's think. Well, I would say first and foremost, create a safe environment. Make learning fun. Has a leader impacted your ability to learn? Absolutely. I've had good leaders and I've had bad leaders. Some good leaders did bad things, then realized it, fixed the problem, owned up to it, and moved on. Others were good leaders who turned bad. What kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be a kind of leader that people say, yeah, that person, they're a good leader. They take care of their team. They're honest. They don't ridicule. They don't allow fear. Human capital. Clark says that human capital is everything, and he's so right. If you think about an organization, break it down. What really is the true value of an organization? How big its bank account is? How many assets they have? Hmm. Human capital. Because that organization would not be able to have attained or to retain, hold on to any of those assets if they didn't have the human capital to earn them in the first place and to properly manage them. So human capital really is kind of like the more important asset here, isn't it? Because with human capital, you can generate financial capital. With human capital, you can properly manage and maintain financial capital. Frederick Winslow Taylor, right around the turn of the early 1900s, sought to increase efficiency. But what he did is he ended up harming so many people, women, children, minorities, not necessarily him directly, but his findings, his theories, if you want to call them that. You see, he was at a time when prejudice ran amok, and his practices only made that worse. Women have never been paid what they should be paid, and I think that's atrocious. But it was even worse back in his time. Minority groups, unfortunately, have not always, and still, unfortunately, do not always get treated properly. I think that's horrible, but it was even worse in his time. Children were sent to work in the factories, and many of them died because factories were dangerous and unsafe. But for Frederick Winslow Taylor, the capital that was important was not human capital, it was profit, the market share, things like that. While those are important, they're not the most important. Many researchers, thankfully, have begun through the last few decades to really take Frederick Winslow Taylor's work and turn it on its head. You see, his views lasted, well, even through to today. Thankfully, in the 1980s, Robert Greenleaf worked at defining and explaining something called servant leadership. And later on, other researchers looked at humble leadership. And I'm glad that these researchers have embarked in those areas, and I firmly believe in those types of leadership. But it took decades before researchers really got there. We can create a new idea and have it be so catastrophic now, but unfortunately, it could last for decades. And think about all the lives, all the people that are devastated because of it. Many people were devastated because of the efficiency Frederick Winslow Taylor sought to attain. Now, I'm not saying efficiency is not good. We should seek efficiency, but not at the cost of our human capital. I'm not saying that everything Frederick Winslow Taylor did or said was horrible. I'm just saying most of the stuff he's known for isn't really positive. So learning and the competitive cycle. Clark noted that learning increases the competitive cycle and that an organization's knowledge directs its competitiveness. So learner safety is important because you want your team to learn so that they can be creative, they can innovate, that you can move the products that you're developing, you can make them better, you can get them to more people, you can create new technology. So really what drives that is learning. You want teams of people that are hungry to learn. You want to create an environment where they are free to learn, comfortable to learn, safe to learn. So we can deduce that an organization's competitive advantage is connected to the learning its employees engage in. Clark pointed that out. Once again, I totally agree. Edmondson, another researcher, wrote in 1999 that individuals tend to withhold knowledge in a team setting. She further pointed out that admitting errors or mistakes is rare within a team atmosphere. Why is this? It's because people often fear reprisal. They fear that ridicule. They fear fear. So, as a leader, you want to create an environment free of those things. Edmondson further pointed out that organizational learning can have its foundation in its shared organizational history. Let's back that up for a second here. Organizational learning can have its foundation in a shared organizational history. That's because not all organizations have a good, clean history. Some that have lasted a number of decades could have a racist past. Thankfully, they changed, and now they've got a good, healthy, wholesome, inclusive, diverse current and future. But if you hide those skeletons in that closet, the truth will come out at some point in time. And when it does, the fact that you hid it will make you look shady and unethical, and you'll lose reputation. So a solution to this is you need to create areas that people can constructively dissent in. And we'll talk more about constructive dissent in future lectures, but this is an introduction to it. So constructive dissent is a very positive thing, where destructive dissent will tear something apart. Constructive dissent is basically having people give you feedback on either the status quo or on how things are being done or processes or policies, and to give that feedback and deconstructing it in a way that they look for the areas that need to be changed. That's positive. One thing that you can use to help with this deconstructing and working through the organizational history is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Corporate social responsibility, CSR, is another good one. You can use these as frameworks for how you analyze that organizational history. It'll help you define the past, the present, and plan for the future. Edmondson also found that cohesiveness can lead to groupthink. And we'll come back to groupthink in further lectures, but cohesiveness is that group really just sticking together, not letting anyone else in. There's a good type of cohesiveness that where a team has esprit de corps, that they're a unit. But when they become that we're the in group and anyone that's not part of our team is the out group, that's a very negative mentality to have. Very dangerous mentality to have also. Ensuring that your teams have psychological safety relates to interpersonal trust. How can I feel safe in my environment, in my team, with my team, if I don't trust the people I'm there with? So as a leader, you got to find ways to build up that trust. Psychological safety relates to learner safety. Now, of course, you might say, of course it does. We're learning about learner safety in a course discussing psychological safety. But really, psychological safety can be applied to any number of social situations. Learner safety can be applied to any number of social situations. From the standpoint of business, we're looking at teams within an organization. We want to make sure that people are psychologically safe. And in that psychological safety, part of it is making sure that they are safe to learn. It's really the foundation. Psychological safety starts with inclusion safety as the firm foundation. On top of that is another foundation layer, learner safety. And then on top of that, the superstructure is built. Leaders should be willing to accept negative feedback. If this is an opportunity to grow, to innovate, leaders need to allow for mistakes. Once again, we're not talking about brain surgery. We're talking about an ordinary team working through learning processes, techniques, developing, working on things. That is the type of team we're talking about right now. Not a team where life and death is in their hands, literally, as the case of a surgeon. So that concludes this lecture. Hopefully next week, I will get it through my thick skull to hit the record button on Zoom when we start. Thank you for your patience. You have a great week.